Net Worth is the 20th episode of the 5th season of Everybody Loves Raymond. This is directed by David Lee, and as always there will be spoilers from now as I go through the episode and share some thoughts. And it's a decent episode. It's probably never going to be a favourite, but I think there are some good messages and certainly some very funny moments. It starts off with Ray saying that he knows somebody who's looking for investments for go-karts. Debra's not thinking this is a good idea, but they have this presentation in their house, and it's a good, fun presentation. I liked it. Debra still says no, so Ray has to tell them no, and he asks them for his deposit back. And yeah, he gave them $1,000 without Debra knowing, which I think is a bad idea, but I also think Ray kind of has a point with what he says in a moment, but I also think he very much went the wrong way about it. I kind of feel like he's allowed the opinion but shouldn't vocalise it, but I'll expand on this in a moment. He tries to tell Debra, he kind of butters her up when they're in bed and compliments her, and then finally tells her, I gave them $1,000. And she is quite rightly annoyed by this. And this is where I say Ray's allowed his feelings, but also he shouldn't vocalise it. But Debra's allowed to be right as well. Because Debra is very annoyed, but Ray says to her, it's my money to screw up with. And that's when things get awkward. And she says, what did you say? And Ray responds, with which to screw up, which I love. I absolutely love that. And Debra leaves with all of the bedding. She leaves to sleep downstairs, but she takes all of the bedding, just leaving the bare mattress, which I thought was very, very funny. And this is where I think both are in the right to an extent. Absolutely, financial decisions should be a couple's decision, especially $1,000. But at the same time, Ray does earn that money. And if he wants to spend his hard-earned money in a certain way, he should be allowed. But again, I also see Debra's point. But also, if you earn your money and you're not allowed to spend any of it without consulting your wife, which is kind of the family dynamic they clearly have, that's really awkward. So I'm kind of on both of their sides. So I feel like Ray is allowed to feel that way, but he shouldn't have vocalised it. He should have just said yes, it should have been a decision, while internally feeling like, but I earned it, I should be able to spend it. But when you're in a family, you have to consider other people. So the point there is that I don't think anybody's in the wrong necessarily, but they went about it the wrong way. So it's a bit of a grey area here. And Debra has actually written this itemised list of all of the things that she thinks she should be paid for, because it's his money. She hasn't got any money. She's basically working for him. And Ray, to his credit, for the first time, wasn't just grovelling and immediately trying to get forgiveness. He was kind of a bit snippy with her with this list. And again, I think Debra's got a point. If Ray just thinks his money is his and she has nothing, that's not great, because she works by looking after the children and looking after the house, and that's her contribution. So the money should kind of go between them because she's taking some of the workload from him. So I think she also has a very valid point, but giving him an itemised list of things she wants to be paid for, it felt a little bit petty. It felt not very productive, not a very good way to resolve this problem. And Ray could clearly see that. Robert comes over, he's quite happy. Turns out he invested in the go-karts. And Debra points out that Robert can invest his money any way he wants. He's not married, he's alone. To which Robert replies, doo-dah, doo-dah. Which just, I loved it a lot. I had a lot of fun with it. And then Frank and Marie come over, and they start to talk about their value of their life and which of them has the most value. And I don't think that's a helpful conversation, but it was quite interesting because Debra looks after the house, she looks after the kids. Ray just brings in the money. Now, I say just, it's still a very big deal and such a huge thing for him to do, because without that, they'd fall apart. But at the same time, it does show that he just does this one thing. He goes to work, he brings the money. Whereas Debra's responsible for keeping the house, looking after the kids. We know that Debra pays the bills because Ray tried to do it in an episode and that fell apart. So yeah, Ray might bring in the money, but it's up to Debra to make sure everything gets done that needs to be done. So I thought that was quite an interesting conversation. But Frank did say, whoever brings home the money is the king, which I don't agree with. And I will say, I don't think that's what Ray was thinking. Yes, I think he's allowed to spend his money the way he wants, within reason. For example, he should be able to I don't know, go karting. That was difficult to say. He should be able to go and have a go karting lesson class. I don't know what the term is. I don't go kart, but spending $1,000, not so much. So I think they both need to kind of meet in the middle a little bit more. And Frank leaves with his speech about being a king, and Marie explains that she's not bothered about Frank's attitude, because whenever he would bring home the money, he would have a big dinner, fall asleep, and then she'd just start moving the money around, doing whatever needed to be done. And I thought that was quite interesting. I like the fact that Marie is also just not bothered by Frank's unhelpful attitude. I feel like this is what she's had her whole married life with him, and it worked. She's just gotten used to it. She's found ways to distract him, such as with a lot of food, and she's, instead of making a big deal out of it, she's just found workarounds. And I thought that was quite helpful. I'm not saying it's the best advice to give your partner food to make them sleep so you can manipulate the money a bit, but at the same time, finding a healthy workaround instead of arguing all the time is a pretty good idea. We then find out that Marie gave Debra a loan when they were first together and they didn't have a lot of money. Ray didn't know about this. This part of the narrative felt a little bit random. I don't feel like it added very much to the story. It did then move us on to the final discussion with Ray and Debra, where they agreed, let's just always discuss our finances. You tell me if you want to invest in something. I'll tell you if your mother gives us a loan. And I think that's the healthiest outcome for both of them. So yes, the loan discussion did leave us with a positive resolution, but it just felt a little random. I think maybe they could have done a little bit more with that, maybe introduced it a little earlier on. I don't know, it just felt a little underdeveloped, but I didn't mind it too much. And we end with Frank being curious about something related to finances, and then Marie distracts him with food. So a nice way to end things. Not a bad episode. As I said, I think Debra and Ray, to an extent, are both right about this, but also not completely. Ray absolutely should be allowed to spend his money the way he wants, but also just common courtesy, discuss it with your wife. But also, Debra's allowed to be annoyed, because just because she doesn't bring in money, it doesn't mean she doesn't contribute and isn't allowed an equal say. But also, why does Debra get to say, no, we're not doing this investment? Why is the decision made with Debra? Ray really wants to do this investment. I'm not saying I think it's a good idea, but he really wants to do this. Why is it up to Debra to make the final decision? And I guess that's where the balance comes in. Both of them are very much in the right, but also in the wrong. So it's an awkward situation. And I think the biggest takeaway and the main message is just discuss things. Don't hide money away. Don't tell your partner that you're thinking of investing when you've already done it. That's particularly awkward, because that feels deceitful almost. So that wasn't good of Ray. And just discuss these things. Maybe Debra would have been okay with it if Ray had said, look, I really, really want to do this. This is where we can get the money from. Or maybe, I don't know, I'll not go and play golf as much. I'm assuming it costs to play golf. You have to pay to enter the green. I don't know. I don't golf. But if Ray really wanted to do this, he could have made a valid argument with cutting back on some other things that he does. At the end of the day, discuss your finances with each other, but I don't think either person should have the final decision on what happens if you're in a relationship, particularly if you have young children as well. So I think I've said enough on the matter. It's a good episode, very funny at places, very thought-provoking in others. My highlight is Robert saying doodah, doodah. I don't know why, I just thoroughly enjoyed it. Marie was great as well, and in general, needless to say, Net Worth is a pretty brilliant episode of Everybody Loves Raymond.